Hi, everyone. Welcome to Restitch America. My name is Alma, Ohene-Opare, and I'm very excited to be here with you today. And today's conversation is going to be awesome because our guest today is someone that I'm sure you are all going to love. And it's someone who normally would say it's on a different part of the political spectrum than I am. However, one of our goals on this podcast is to show that we can have civil conversation with anybody we meet, and we can build the kind of unity that is required to move our country forward. But before we introduce the guest today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Restitch America to be notified when new content is available. Also, be sure to connect with our guests. One of the things we want to do is, bring people here who can challenge our reasoning and help us kind of think through things a little differently. And so please go and connect with our guests. We usually put their information in the description of the videos, so look for it and connect with them so that we can keep the conversation going. So now that we have all that out of the way, I'm going to introduce our guest today. Her name is Marcia Rothschild, and here is a little bit about her. Marcia is a 30-year resident of Estes Park, Colorado, who has been remotely between Los Angeles and New York. She's a casting and scouting director for both sixwolves.com and westmanagement.jp. Now, Marcia's heritage is native Muskogee and French Dutch, which is kind of interesting combination, right? And she, as well as her children, are on the autism spectrum. Marcia is pro-equality for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, so BIPOC. She is also pro-equality for LGBTQ people and also for women. She is an agnostic, but also has a deep faith in God. And I want to hear a little bit more about that during the conversation today. I want to understand kind of how you come to that. But to begin, I'd like the audience to get to know you a little bit more. And the way we do that is through some icebreaker questions. And before we even get into that, I just want to make a note that I reject a lot of times when I hear people say things like, oh, I may not agree with someone. I'm like, how do you know without talking to them? Usually you are doing some kind of mental gymnastics to say, if this person is associated with this group or that group, then we're not going to agree. And even before we started the podcast, Marcia and I had a conversation and we found a lot of different points of agreement. And so I'm going to start by asking her some icebreaker questions. So Marcia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. So let's see. What is the best advice you have received in your life and how have you applied it?
To always come from love and to not be judgmental. I work so hard on these. One of the best things I got told is that you can love who we are, but you don't have to love what somebody is doing, which helped me. And also the non-judgment. It's a toughie. And I battle it and I do a lot of prayer work around it, but it's a goal that keeps me growing. So that's really helpful.
I love that. I love that so much. I heard a quote from someone that I thought was really interesting. He said he saw a guy driving a Subaru and had all these stickers on the Subaru. And he also, drove past the guy and he had all these tattoos and everything. And then he saw one of the stickers on the Subaru and it said, "Don't judge me because I sin differently than you do." And I thought that's exactly, the world we're in, where we overlook our own weaknesses and we cast aspersions on other people and judge them. So I like that advice you're giving is not being judgmental, coming from a place of love. That is important in having a civil conversation. So thank you for sharing that. So
Well,
next, go ahead.
It's also like, I'm older than you. And so I remember when tattoos were like, oh my God, they have a tattoo, bad person. And then now I'll never get a tattoo. And I have my reasons. But when I see people tattoos, I'm like, oh, I love your tats. And I look at them because I know it's their expression of art. And some people, it's their expression of healing. You know, they've been through trauma or whatever. And I'm just like, oh my God, I love your sleeve. Like I've even learned some of the language. And I think that's how we connect. It doesn't mean you have to do the same thing, but you can have awe or intrigue or just admiration. I mean, there's no way I'm letting
That
anybody
is
needle my body. You know, it's not happening.
exactly. I'm in the same camp, but I agree with you. I agree. And
Yeah.
I feel like I've evolved a little bit. I grew up in a culture that was very kind of conservative around things like that. I
Yeah.
grew up in West Africa and tattoos are very rare.
Mm.
We don't see that. And so having that kind of perception, and then coming to realize that, that doesn't define what a person's character is. And we need to begin to kind of shed some of those things that we grew up with
Yeah.
and be a little more open because in the end, you will never go wrong loving somebody. Like it's just impossible to go wrong. So
Yeah.
that's good. Second question. Tell me if you can identify three of the most influential people in your life and how they impacted you.
Gandhi. I so love Gandhi. I pray to Gandhi sometimes because he came from nothing and he so believed in independence and he so believed that he could be authentic and truthful to who he is. And he didn't malign any of his character. That sometimes happens, you know, power and greed can change people, and he just stayed so beautiful. Desmond Tutu, because after everything he's been through, he laughed and giggled and laughed. And even when he was, you know, had been through cancer twice, the guy was giggling and dancing at speaking engagements. And I love that inspiration of finding happiness no matter what your trials and tribulations are. And Mother Teresa, for a totally different reason than most people, because she wasn't always happy. She made it very clear this is hard. She made it very clear it's not always fun. She made it very clear that this path that she had chosen, or she felt that God had chosen for her, was really rough. And I appreciated that, you know, I like that balance. And my favorite celebrity is Viola Davis
Okay.
because I think she's a goddess. And I highly recommend anyone to follow her Instagram. I don't know if she's on, she's probably on TikTok, but I'm a little more of an Instagrammer. And she's so inspiring. And I even loved, she just did an interview and I was blown away. I mean, she's such a mega A-lister. And she brought up that she makes so much far less than all of her white peers. And I was just like shocked. Like I couldn't believe that was happening even in Hollywood. And but probably my greatest present inspiration is youth. I drive some of my peers batty because I just love youth. All my assistants are youth. I absolutely live and revere because I truly believe that they can change the world. And I actually believe they are living at one of the best times to change it. And I believe that we've had generation after generation that's been like, gee, what do I do? Well, I guess I go make money or do this. And now they can be like, I'm going to work on climate change and I'm going to work on a better political system and I'm going to make a difference, you know? And I think we just don't give them enough credit. They're far more seeing than we ever want to believe once we get older.
Thank you for sharing that. And I would say I agree on the youth part of things. So my parents are educators. My mom founded a school, multiple schools, and she always believed that the future belongs to the youth, and education she felt was the key to economic opportunity. And her goal all through her life was to help educate children, and she was able to change the lives of thousands of kids. And so I grew up, I graduated from high school, and the first thing I did as I was waiting to go to college, my mom hired me in her school. And so I became a teacher at 16 and started teaching English and computer skills. And I've loved teaching ever since. And at some point, I've always thought, once my economics are figured out, I'd love to be some kind of teacher. So
Well,
anyway, thank you for
being
sharing
a
that.
teacher, you're being a teacher now, you
Yeah,
know, and I think that's beautiful. So, I mean, that's what we all have to be. We just have to, keep doing what we're trying to do.
exactly. All right, so now let's get into the discussion for today. So I wanted to give a little bit of a background on how Marcia and I came into contact with each other. I posted a video a few weeks ago on Instagram, and Marcia was one of the people who commented on it. And every now and then when I post a video, and it was a video that I specifically directed to people on the left. So this was me soliciting some reaction from them. And so in this video, I asked a few questions about, the left's perception of people on the right and how they see us, and do they really believe that we are crazy for some of the things that we believe? And so Marcia responded to and commented on it, and immediately there was a lot of back and forth with a lot of people on the post with Marcia, and so I reached out and I said, Marcia, it looks like you have something to say. So let's see if we can get you on and have you communicate, because most likely the people who are going to listen to this episode are going to be people on the right for the most part.
Sure.
And so this is an opportunity to hear kind of the thoughts and where people are coming from on the left, I would say, and then potentially see where we have points of unity. And so that's the goal today. And one of the discussions that came up as we were kind of going through that back and forth was this idea of critical race theory. So critical race theory, for those who have kind of heard it in passing, has now become somewhat of a political football, right? And so I'm going to give a little bit of a history of it, and then I will have Marcia kind of give me her thoughts on it. And one thing I want to do is separate the theoretical understanding of CRT versus its practical application in our lives. And there's always this question: is it happening in schools? What exactly are people teaching? What are Republicans or people on the right against, and so on and so forth. So let's start with just the history of CRT. So I had my producer prepare a little bit of information here. So just to make sure I'm not misrepresenting anything, I'm going to read this so that we can get that on the record. So let's see here. CRT, critical race theory, is an intellectual and social movement and loosely organized framework of legal analysis that is based on the premise that race is not a natural, biologically grounded feature of physically distinct subgroups of human beings, but instead a socially constructed or culturally invented category that is used in many ways to exploit and oppress people of color. Critical race theorists hold that racism is inherent in the law and legal institutions of the United States. The theory was officially organized in 1989, but has roots in the 60s and 70s post-civil rights movement. The precursor of CRT being critical legal studies, which was also a movement in that time. And it dedicated itself to examining how law and legal institutions serve the interests of the wealthy and powerful at the expense of the poor and marginalized. So critical legal studies being an offshoot of a Marxist-oriented critical theory. So it seems like there's a daisy chain, and I'm going to pause and explain this a little bit. So there's a daisy chain. You start from the roots of Marxism, you move into critical theory, and then from critical theory, you get into critical legal studies, and then eventually you get to critical race theory. And the main difference between CRT and CLS, so critical race theory and critical legal studies, is that critical race theorists do not wish to abandon law and legal rights because they're indeed, or because they believe the law and rights are needed to implement the kind of reform that they're looking for.
Yeah.
And then I'll wrap it up here. So anyway, I'll stop right here and say, okay, this is kind of the basic foundation of the idea of critical theory, critical race theory, critical legal studies. And basically, from the founders of critical race theory, you start with this idea that race and racism is ordinary. It's not an aberration in America. It's basically ordinary in the sense that it permeates everything that we do to the point of not actually standing out. It's embedded in our systems. It's embedded in our education, our prison justice system. It's embedded in our housing policies. It's basically everywhere, ubiquitous. And therefore, in order to create an equitable society, we have to identify all these tentacles of of racism and uproot them and get them out of the system. And that's my understanding of the goals of the people who push that. So I'm going to turn the time over to you and have you kind of give us your feeling and your background on it.
Well, first of all, I love this. And I just think this is so great. This is really, we're going to end up having part 1 and part 2. I'm pretty sure of this. So I want to kind of go back because I think that we, as you know, just the population of the United States, we get triggered by words. So I want to go back to this Marxist-oriented critical theory. So first of all, and I'm going to be going, I look at my notes, you look at yours, you know us. So a conservative, Deanna Niascu, wrote in the Journal of Law and Policy, quote, if the 1983 pamphlet version contained Marxist observations, it was only to reject its methods. And the reason I bring this up is because we align Marxism to communism, okay? Then Christian blogger and parishioner Bradley Mason, quote, it has become nearly a truism for many Christians that critical race theory is incompatible with the gospel or Christianity, though none so far have met the burden of proof necessary to sustain such a claim, nor even begun to travel down the rigorous path to do so. And when he was asked if critical race theory is Marxist, he said, quote, I see this claim multiple times per day. CRT scholars simply don't write much about Marx or Marxism. Now, the way I see CRT is it's a body of ideas and a set of approaches that look at how racial unfairness have been woven into the fabric of our institutions, which is so beautiful that I'm on Restitch America, right? So when we go back, I think this is so crucial because I don't feel like we give enough honor to who started CRT. So in the 1970s, the intellectual forefather of CRT was Derek Bell, who was the first ever Black tenured professor at Harvard Law School. And he devoted his scholarship to exploring how it came to be that Black people remained at the bottom of practically every measure of social well-being. Bell argued that if racial inequality persisted in a post-civil rights era, then the law was central to explaining that persistence. Then came along, which is probably more of what we're talking about, the 89, 93 level, the incredible Black and brown scholars. And the reason I bring up their color is because I think the challenge in the United States of CRT, I'm going to segue and come back, is that we have a large overall white population very upset about it. And they're upset because of how Black and brown people see their truth. And all Black and brown and Asian people can have different truths, but it's their truth. So when you got into the late 80s, 90s, you had these incredible Black and brown scholars from Harvard, Berkeley, Brown, and they sought to answer questions such as, why is that racial inequality enduring and persisting even decades after these laws have been passed, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964? And the biggie, why is racism still enduring and how do we truly abolish it? So they were looking for solutions. They weren't looking to, get everybody upset. They were looking at, why is this happening? And their prevailing thought at the time that law was not at all involved in creating and sustaining racial hierarchies. Now, on one positive, CRT has created accomplishments such as aiding in the passage of affirmative action laws, reforming urban planning to decrease segregation, and securing fair housing rights for those in marginalized communities. But critical race theory challenges the idea that, and this should make anyone in the white population happy. It challenges the idea that racism exists only in silos, like white nationalist groups or Ku Klux Klan, or even individual acts of bigotry. So what it's doing is it's interrogating meaning we're questioning, how it lives on in the law. And critical race theorists hope to help undo racism. So that's the biggest goal, and I think my other challenge has been that it's mainly taught in law schools, and for the sole purpose of helping future lawyers understand how to help their clients from marginalized communities. And how did we even get here? It got reared. It began with and let's really look at this. And this is what I think is so key. Let's look at the time that this happened. So August 2, 2019, the New York Times published the 1619 Project, which was written by a journalist and professor, Hannah Jones. That's her last name. I'm just got a really long.
Nicole.
Yes. Thank you. Because I was like, what's her whole name? But all she was trying to do, even though, you can look at 1619 on Hulu and you're definitely going to find discrepancies. But if you take that whole series, and I'm sorry, but even if 20% of it is true, that's kind of scary. So when she did the initial New York Times, she brought up how slaves started in the colonies, and the first ship with a couple dozen came over in 1619, but that it's not a part of our history. So then remember, and I think this is what I'm hoping that our audience gets. This is for all of us. This isn't liberal against conservative. I truly believe we are pawns in elections. And I feel that we have people that have crazy amounts of power and greed. And I mean, when I found out that Nancy Pelosi's worth I don't even remember, it's like 23 million, or maybe it's
120 million dollars.
I almost had a stroke. I was like, and we need to stop that. We need to find a way that if you're in servitude like she's been for decades, that doesn't happen. But that's both sides, everybody. So there's all this power. So we have election coming, and I've looked and I've searched, and basically what happened is that Trump, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to, cut down, anybody who loves Trump, but he denounced the teaching of 1619, and it became a way to create election drama. So for example, in Virginia, the week before the election, there's 162 mentions of CRT. The week after, only 31. So it became this huge talking point. But it also, of course, it was just like the perfect storm, because we went from Trump saying this, then we went into millions of people of all races taking to the streets, May 26, 2020, calling for racial injustice after Floyd's murder. Then on September 9th, 2020, Trump posts, quote, Trump orders purge of critical race theory from federal agency. And he writes, this is a sickness that cannot be allowed to continue. Please report any sightings so we can quickly extinguish it. So that got all the conservatives up in arms. And all of a sudden it became these woke liberals hitting the streets saying Black Lives Matter. And I think that we have to kind of come back to the facts. So you have critical race theory, and it's saying that these systems are embedded into our institutions. We have a pandemic incarceration with almost 3 million people in jail now, okay? Out of our population, 6% are Black men. Over 41% of them are Black men that are incarcerated. How can we not think systemic racism is built into our laws? If not, what are you saying about Black men that are 8 times more likely to be incarcerated than white men? I mean, you have a choice. You're either going to say it's somehow institutionalized, or you're going to be saying really horrible things about the inherent natural
Nature.
abilities of people of color. So my biggest concern, and this is really my biggest, we look like a bunch of criminals. The United States, this war on crime that has really, if you look back, it's unreal. I mean, it's in the 13th on Netflix, and you realize that politician after politician got hard on crime, the war on crime, the war on drugs. And we never want to look at the facts of other countries. We don't want to look at Amsterdam that has so little crime and has so little problems with drugs, and their drugs are legal. And so we don't want to look at, addiction as a sickness, that it's really like addiction is so hard to overcome. For the white audience, maybe more than anybody of color, you should watch A Good Person. It's a new movie that's out. And it hit me so hard because I had no idea of the intense obsession and addiction of OxyContin. And it's a white woman that's going through it. But what I want us to understand is that this war on crime is making money for publicly traded corporations who own the prisons. And when I tell my friends, like, they're like, talking about it, and there's so many criminals, and I'm like, do you realize that many prisons are publicly traded? And they're like, you're kidding. I'm like, no. So if you're publicly traded, you want your investors to be constantly
Get a
money.
return on their investment. Exactly.
Right.
Your
And
incentives are set to want more incarceration.
right. And I've only got one more fact. I swear to God, I'm gonna let
Go
you talk.
ahead.
I can talk forever. I'm so sorry. But so it's become this machine, and it's a money-making machine. It's the people who make the clothes, it's the people who provide the security and the tech, the people who feed the prisoners. But just as an example, right now we have Arkansas passing a reform bill that doesn't even give people a chance for parole regarding 18 crimes, not one crime like, murder, 18 crimes. Plus, Governor Huckabee is asking for 3,000 more beds, but the population only grew 0.5% the last 2 years. So that means Arkansas, once it gets 3,000 more beds, which is construction companies making money, more people making money, they have to find 3,000 more criminals to fill those beds, and say some may never get out. And that is how we practice justice. Where's the repentance in that? Plus, the average prisoner does 8 years, and each prisoner costs the taxpayer on average 35 to 45,000 a year. Some, I saw like Florida, it was like 17,900. Some prisons averages 62,000 a year. So we have almost 3 million incarcerated, and it's an $8 billion cost to taxpayers a year. To do what? To say we're the land of criminals? It's just, that's what drives me berserk.
Okay. Yeah. And I love this and I love that you came prepared to present these facts. And what it does for me is it gives me kind of a foundation of where your passion comes from. And from what I've heard, like, there's nothing that I disagree with inherently with what you're saying. Understanding that people have incentives to keep certain systems alive, right? I feel the same way about the medical industry, right? The medical industry needs people to get into those beds. And so, instead of making sure you're well, we want people to just repeat customers. I mean, if you're working for a SaaS company, we don't want you to churn. And if we don't want you to churn, that means we have to keep you coming back over and over and over again. And so the same, I get where you're coming from. And so with respect to CRT, I think what happens with a lot of different theories, what happens is that in order to promulgate that theory to the masses, you have to simplify it, right? Because you're not having this intelligent conversation where we're literally going through the history and understanding of how it came about, what were the goals of the people who were pushing it. And we have to boil it down. And that's where a lot of times we lose the nuance, we lose the detail, we lose all the pieces of it that makes it something that we could potentially work together on rather than divide each other with. And so my perspective on CRT is, of course, someone observed something in the world. They observed that there's this inequality that appeared to be systemic in the sense that it didn't matter what you did, with all things being equal, somehow, it seemed like Black people in America seem to be on the bottom of any economic, like you said, any socioeconomic totem pole. And so the question is, why is that the case? And so critical theory, critical race theory was this idea that there has to be something that is perpetrating this, state in America, and we have to identify it. And critical race theory says it's perhaps systemic racism that is what is embedded into the system. And so, as an outsider coming in, and as a person who is kind of with a problem-solving mindset, I ask myself, okay, if it were true that racism is so embedded in the system that it is the thing that keeps people down, and or keeps African Americans in general down. Of course, we have outliers in this situation. However, if racism is the thing, my very first question to confront is, how am I different? Okay, how am I different personally? How is my family a little different? And I know it's anecdotal if I say it that way, but in general, Black people who come from other places and come to America under the same conditions, and in many cases living in the same areas, have a different outcome in many cases. And so that's usually where a lot of people start, or conservatives start, and say, if this is systemic, I would expect that I would be affected by it, and not just me, but other people like me. And so that's usually that first point of contention is there something more? Are we oversimplifying this? Is there something more? Could there be other things?
I love that you said that. That's brilliant. And I'm so thankful you did. Here's the difference. Okay. And this is really amazing because, and I'm not going to say this is the only comparison, but it is intriguing. You come from parents, educators. The TikTok woman that I lashed out at first and said, what a bunch of crap. Sorry, everybody. I had a moment where I wasn't coming from love. She comes from an educator. She also comes from a community that is predominantly white. So, for example, I wrote 15 of my friends, 14 Black, 1 Latin and Black, and I sent them the TikTok. And one of my girlfriends, who was a former assistant of mine, wrote me this beautiful text. And she said, I grew up in a predominantly white community. I had all white friends. And she said, and I didn't have Black friends until she went to Auburn, very esteemed university in the South. And she started getting crap because she realized that some of the people that were there on scholarships were trying to show her the struggle that's really imminent in these communities. This is just my belief. I believe that there are people that have more privilege because of how their parents are, how they're brought up. But when you take, I think I brought up in the TikTok East St. Louis, and you take an area that is so pretty much kind of segregated, to be truthful, and you're talking food justice doesn't exist. And I remember I said something like, there's no Whole Foods in East St. Louis. And one of the women barked back, which I totally understand. She said, I don't have Whole Foods. And I thought to myself, yeah, but your food, you probably have a car. You probably can drive to some type of grocery store, a Piggly Wiggly, whatever. Some people in East St. Louis, the closest place to get food is the liquor store. And it's nothing but junk. I had a friend, I'm going to segue real quick, who was going on a big tour with a major artist. And we've had discussions back and forth. And in that discussion, she countered, was there an issue with food justice? And I said, well, you know what? You're going to this tour. And I said, you're going to Chicago, you're going to St. Louis, where are you going? You tell me. And I said, let's talk in 3 months. I said, you promise me that you will go to the impoverished areas of all these cities, and I want you to walk blocks and tell me what food's available. She was blown away. And it actually made her get more involved with creating food justice in these impoverished communities. So back to your point, there's just so much going on there. We have incessant drug addiction. We have so many issues of alcoholism. We don't have enough mental health in those areas because of the way our tax system is in every state, which I'm so against. I believe that it should be a blanket for taxes instead of just one wealthy area gets the best because they're so rich. And so they get the least of everything. And
it's a spiral because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
bingo. And then the other thing is, as an example, so you come off to me as very highly intelligent, but let's just say my daughter, who with her autism, I have a daughter that will live with me long term, and she's got an IQ of 104. She needs to be prompted every day. If she was living in East St. Louis, I don't care what color she was, she wouldn't get out. And I think that's what we're not looking at. And my challenge is, and I get it, I have discussions all the time with white friends, and they'll say, my, Mexican friend, my Black friend, he doesn't agree, and he's this. And I'm like, okay, but is he going down to the seriously impoverished communities and really checking this out? And my other challenge is when you say, you as an example, my greatest challenge, and I'm so thankful you and I are doing this because you're open. I can't tell you often, particularly, well, all overall, 100% white friends, and we're having a challenging conversation, and I say, do me one favor, watch 13th on Netflix. To give an example, I had a girlfriend of mine send me last week about how Ron DeSantis isn't a, racist or a misogynist. And I said back to her, I said, you know what? In 2020, I asked you, I believe, to watch 13th. Did you watch it? It was like crickets on the text. No response, no response. And I said, I'm not having this conversation with you. If I said, everything you send me, she's anti-vax. And frankly, I think anybody should be able to make their choices on vaccines. I think that's ridiculous that we force it. But she was super anti-vax, and I would read everything she sent me. Anything she sends me, she's Republican. I read it, but she won't read what I send to her. So I think it's very difficult. What's so beautiful about you is that you're open, but I'm so challenged because I can't get my white friends to even watch 13th. And 13th is, I don't even think it's ever been negated. It's nothing but fact after fact after fact. I mean, I'm sure there's probably some discrepancies. So that's my frustration. And back to your point, I think that's the difference. I don't think that CRT is saying you're having an issue, although you probably may at points. You never know. You never know when you don't get the job, you just don't. It's just hard to say.
True. And just to give you a little bit of my background, I came to America initially as a missionary for my church, and I was assigned to Los Angeles. And eventually, during my tenure, I was there for 2 years. I had the opportunity to serve in South Central Los Angeles and served in Compton. I served in Watts for 6 months. And some of what you're saying is true. And I have often said this. I met kids in these areas who I was asking questions, and I was surprised that there were kids in the middle of Los Angeles who had never seen the ocean.
Yeah.
Right. And in that moment, my mind was, what opportunity does this kid have if they still have to imagine what the ocean looks like when the ocean is only 20 miles away?
Oh my God.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I understand where you're coming from, that people are trapped in these systems. The question that I usually have had to grapple with is, like you said, just like the Derek Bell and others were thinking, what is the cause of that? What is the cause of that? Because one question I've always asked myself is, we see a lot of people coming, through the border, and people are walking thousands of miles, right,
Yeah.
to escape what they feel are unlivable conditions. Yesterday, I saw a video, someone showing migrants coming over, and they were asking them, "Where are you from?" Venezuela, this, that, and then I heard one from Burkina Faso. That is the country in Africa that is borders my country, Ghana. And I'm like, how did a person from Burkina Faso get all the way to the southern border and come through? So when you see that,
Yeah.
then the question becomes, why are the people in the inner cities who are trapped, why are they not acting in many cases like these people that are fleeing those
Yeah.
bad conditions? And that's part of the question, is like, what is going on? Why are people stuck? Why are they not up and migrating? Why are they not, in mass doing something? And so actually one point of agreement I'll have with you is this. It's the fact that I believe there are systemic issues. However, I don't necessarily believe that it has more to do with race. I actually think that these systemic issues have to do with political power and political subjugation. And so
Bingo.
there are people who benefit from, just like you said, the prisons being full, hospital beds being full, and there are people who benefit from people being on welfare, people being indebted in one way or another to the government, such that they will not solve these problems because their political power, their livelihood depends on maintaining these systems. So it's not so much that, oh, we don't like this group of people, because in the end, when you go into those inner cities, you will find poor whites, you would find poor blacks, you would find poor Hispanics, and they're all being shafted by the system. And so it's more of a system of economic corruption and
Yeah.
political corruption that is holding people back. And so when you look at, places like San Francisco, wealthy city, and you see people living, tent cities on the side of the street, you know that this is not about money. This is not the fact that San Francisco doesn't have enough resources. And
Yeah.
San Francisco is controlled completely by one political party. So it's not an issue of, there's an issue with one party, fighting against another. So why does that system persist? It's
Yeah.
because there is a economic and political power to be gained by maintaining that system.
Right. And I'm going to go 3 places here with you. So I'm going to go backwards a bit. One, Compton. My daughter was an actress, went and read to young girls in Compton. And it was such an eye opener for me. It was probably one of my first big eye openers. I had never seen first and second graders with no expression. I was horrified. And I know you experienced it. She's reading this beautiful book, and I was horrified. All I could think is, what is going in your life where you are already so bitter? I mean, and then she had to take a picture of them, for the news, and not one smile. And I don't think it was racist at all. We're just talking the whole time. These are little kids, and little kids usually have so much open and innocence and hug everybody and anyone, and they hugged her and stuff, but it was horrifying to me. So that's one. Two, when you say about, why don't they get out, and I get that, I don't think they know any better. I think they think this is it. I think they have been so mowed down, so mowed down. And I don't think most of us who are not in these deeply impoverished areas have any understanding, of what they go through, because we don't take the time to learn. It's kind of hard. It's uncomfortable. History is uncomfortable. And we don't like what's uncomfortable. And I think that's it. And when I interviewed conservatives from the South with my casting partner, and we did it very purposely because, like you, we want to see us finding a way to stitch back together. And I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I'm pretty liberal, right? And he is gay, married to a Black man from Australia. We fell in love with every person we interviewed. And you could tell they loved us. It was just like this love fest. And, but there was a real awareness, and it wasn't a judgment call. It was just an awareness of a few things. I would say, or Adam would, how do you think we can clear up this issue, this ugliness that's occurring, about race? And they overall, most of the interviews said, stop talking about it. And there was an awareness that you see it I'm very activisty, but I'm working on being activisty and putting it in gold and white light and prayers now. But activisty a year ago is pretty ugly, and I've been really focusing, how do I come from my truth of love? And there's just this awareness. We don't want to hear it. Everything's fine as it is. And it's like, yeah, it's fine for you, but it's not fine for this very large, impoverished group of all color. Yes, it's mainly people of color, but it's not. And so I think our challenge is, like I've run into, and maybe you've heard it, I've heard people, I can talk in Hollywood. This is very simple. For decades, we've had white, right? And then all of a sudden now, and I'm a casting director, we're putting in commercials, many people of color, many LGBTQ. I literally have white friends say things like, I'm almost quoting, I'm so sick and tired of those goddamn token colored people. I don't know many colored people that call themselves colored people anymore. That's just how I look at it. Those goddamn colored people and LGBTQ being stuck in every show. I hear this from people. And if I'm hearing it and I'm in Colorado, with our gay governor, I can't even imagine how much it's said elsewhere. And it's because we don't want to see that it's been a swing one way, okay? And how do you get to that middle? You kind of have to swing the other way, because you got to create balance. And you hear people, I had a director say to me that he was upset because he wasn't going to get the job, but some Black woman was. And he felt he was better. And I was like, I'll take a back seat. I don't even care, because it's time. And time to make change is uncomfortable for many people that are peaceful and are happy and don't want to hear about it.
And I get where you're coming from with that perspective. And one of the reasons why I am able to have this conversation in a very objective way is because I think there are parallels between where I came from, which is Ghana, and what is happening here. And the parallel is such that in Ghana, we have a very wide, I would say, gap between the poor and the very poor and people who are very wealthy. And so people think Africa is poor. Wait until you come to Ghana and find an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment going for $600,000, right? And people are buying it. Okay. Yeah. The neighborhood I grew up in, I went back recently and I was looking at some property over there, and I can't afford, and I've lived in America for 20 years, and I can't afford to buy property. I went to see a 1-acre lot, and it was $600,000. So, and people somehow are able to afford it over there. And then you have the extreme poverty where people are literally, sleeping on the ground, and kids who don't have shoes to go to school, and kids who are having to work on the farm to make ends meet, to feed themselves, to feed their families, and so on. And my mom, one of the things she did was establish a school in one of a very impoverished location in the country. And so we had the opportunity to see these kids and bring back the light into their eyes, and to give them a sense of pride, which what we found was it completely transformed what they thought they could become. right? And so we had to go in there. And when we went in there and you asked them, what do you want to do when you grow up? They didn't even know what to say. But after a year, 2 years, 3 years, these kids would say, I want to be an architect. I want to be a doctor. I want to be this or that. And in some cases, my mom was able to bring some of these kids out of the village and bring them into her private school in the city. And today, as we speak, some of those kids that have been brought from the village and brought into the city, some of them today are doing great things. I have 3 of them that are related to me, and they're complete different people. And so what she saw and what she learned and what I have learned is that given the worst thing you can do to a person is to hide from them their potential. And when you hide from a person their potential, you are hiding from them every opportunity that they can work on to get themselves out of the situation they're in. And so this trap that people are stuck in is an artificial trap that has been created, and people profit off of that trap. And what we need to do is to begin to open people's eyes by helping them understand their potential. And so from a conservative point of view, what we're saying is that it doesn't help necessarily to coddle and say, you know what, you are where you are because the system is against you and there's nothing you can do about it, right? We're saying, hey, I want you to look up rather than looking down. I want you to look up to the people who have gotten out, to the people who have these opportunities. I want you to inspire yourself with the image of that success that you can achieve. And we want that to be infused in your life in every way possible, such that you wake up in the morning and say, I woke up on a cold floor, but I'm not going to be here forever. I have a step that I can take that will move me forward. And my goal and my hope is that we don't only talk about it and talk about that vision, but create programs that allow these people to hold on to the end of that vision and actually move themselves out of these situations. And it starts with that education, getting into that system, breaking up the cartel that is holding these people in various ways, and then inspiring these children with a vision of what they can become. All right, so our conversation with Marcia went a little over, so we're going to break it here. This is the end of episode 1, and episode 2 will be released next week. For now, I encourage you all to like, follow, and subscribe to Restitch America and help us get more conversations like this going. Your support is greatly appreciated, and we thank all of you who have been with us from the beginning. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again with part 2 of the interview with Marcia next week.